that. That was thank you for that. Those kind words. Pleasure to be here, and really excited. Right, this is such a broad topic, a very interesting one. Something that I've had, more than a passing interest. I've had, Colart mentioned, a degree in environmental engineering. Did a lot of work when some of the words that we are talking about today were very much, in early stages of research, like circular business models and things. So have been, around the block a little bit, dabbled in a number of industries, all the way from environmental engineering and design to startups, innovation, working with companies on new cutting edge business models. And education as well, before joining TCS. And at TCS, I get to do all of the above. So really interesting times, and very exciting times for me personally. So I'm just going to kick us off. And, we've all probably on the call know all of these different things, right? We have a very clear awareness and general agreement on what our current situation is. In fact, this is the decade of action. This is where we really have to, walk the talk on climate, on biodiversity loss, on waste management, on social equity, and everything else, right? So this is a major decade for action, and we've seen things like planetary boundaries. We've seen the UN sustainability goals that provide a wide range of opportunities for businesses to take action. There's really no excuse. We've seen the IPCC climate report, the Paris agreements, and over and above, we're seeing companies take ESG seriously, take that into a very key aspect of what they deliver on in terms of reporting on their actions, reporting on how they're impacting their wider communities, and so on and so forth. So there is that general awareness. We are also seeing that there is a lot of opportunity, right? The World in 2050 report identifies sort of these 6 transformation areas, right, which would really help us go towards that long-term sustainability that we are looking for. So, of course, decarbonization, energy, climate, top of mind, but there's a host of different challenges. And when I say challenges, by the other side of the coin, opportunity to make a difference and actually really move the dial. And whether that is, feeding, additional 2 billion population. How are we meeting that from our current agricultural methods and means? How are we looking at consumption? How are we looking at circular economy? And I read this very interesting article recently that, the supply chain issues are in the news globally. And alongside that, there was a stark article that said, yes, there are supply chain issues, but there's also an increase in demand, a pent-up demand on the back of COVID-19 that is impacting supply chains all around the world. And it got me thinking about, consumption patterns and things like that. So there's a whole heap of opportunities here that have been identified in this World in 2050 report that we are going after. TCS is part of the Tata Group, as Colart mentioned at the very start. We are one of India's largest conglomerates and based globally in many countries. TCS is part of that Tata Group. TCS is in 46 countries around the world with over 500,000 employees. So we are, we make a dent in terms of scale and commitment. And so what we do matters. What we do matters in terms of corporate sustainability. What we do matters in terms of how we treat our communities, how we treat our suppliers, how we treat our employees. So we take that very seriously, and really proud of the fact that we've announced our ambitions to achieve net zero by 2030, in addition to all of the other things that we do. So the Tata Code of Conduct and community at the center of everything we do is absolutely paramount to what we are doing at TCS and the wider Tata Group. If we look at how we approach sustainability, how do we make that move? How do we make that shift, right? And I'm of course coming at this whole presentation from a very business-centric point of view. We're talking about enterprise ecosystems, how businesses are becoming more sustainable in their operations. value chain. So, how are we going to supply chain sustainability? So we're going beyond our, beyond our direct impacts, but indirect impacts, and how our supply chains are impacting the overall, what is their overall footprint. We're moving beyond that to cross-industry collaboration. This is more about more of an ubiquitous sustainable living. It's much more broader. It's embedded across products. It's embedded across industries, competitors, etc. And moving across that is even bigger. It's much broader, much more focused on cross-sector ecosystem, looking at everything in all the touch points, the system, as we call it, a very holistic approach to sustainability. And that's where we actually begin to, look at regenerative economies, right? This is not even, we're still talking sustainability below that. And only when we are touching that point where we are looking cross-sector, systemic level view, understanding those shifts, where we're actually beginning to touch upon what regenerative really means, or regenerative economy. And what does regenerative mean, right? I mean, just to put that out there. And some of us might have seen this type of image. Business as usual is something that doesn't care about what is the impact, what is the output, what are the social, environmental reach of the business in a negative way or a positive way. But as we move towards sustainability, and sustainability is often talked about as sort of the golden standard. Of course, we're working towards that, but sustainability is actually just sustaining, right? It's just sustaining what we need to actually help have ecosystems and the environment actually even just simply sustain our current way of life. But what we need now is actually beyond. We need to repair, regenerate, revitalize our ecosystems, our ecology, and thereby also then revitalize human nature relationships, human business relationships, human societal relationships as well. So that's sort of the graph we're looking at, that we have to move beyond conventional, green, sustainable, restorative to regenerative. So our actions need not just maintain status quo, but actually are regenerating, leaving things better than you found them. So it's actually going over and above or beyond just maintaining the status quo. So what I wanted to sort of talk to you about, sort of just leave you with maybe 3 things that is top of mind for me, and how I envision we begin to shift that dial in New Zealand and globally, right? It's how do we begin to do that? And from where I sit, right, I'm my perspective in working on innovation, working on business models, working on how do we leverage technology, to meet market needs. Business model innovation absolutely sits at the center of that. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And to sort of start off, it's this, I love this saying, I do not need a drill, I only need a hole in the wall. And so this kind of thinking actually provokes, what do you actually need? What is our problem statement? How can we change the way we do things so that we are leveraging efficiencies? We don't have to leverage the product, we only leverage what we need. And so this is sort of the basis of concepts like the sharing economy, or collaborative consumption, or access-based economy, efficiency-based economies, even circular economies, right? So these are the fundamentals of just a shift in thinking. What do you actually need? I need a drill. I don't need a drill. I need a hole in the wall. So that's just the basis of it. And I always find that this. There's a wonderful graph. It's a bit dated, but I love the what it represents. That you have emerging technologies, you have all of this amazing innovation, and you have market needs on the other side. But if we are using the same old business model to leverage new technologies, we're never going to quite fully holistically utilize that. So what we need is that business model innovation that's sitting in the middle to fully harness technological advances to meet that market need. And our market needs are shifting, our market needs are urgent. And a whole heap of these, right? And a lot of them that you're seeing on the screen are familiar: personalization, closed loop, usage-based pricing. Things like this are prompting a rethink on business as usual, right? Usage-based pricing, like in terms of, using, retrofitting a space with with light bulbs is probably the normal way to do things. But what if Philips came in and said, oh, we are, how about I serve you light as a service? So you're only paying for the light, not for the light bulbs. So it's just that focus on thinking in terms of how you're shifting where the value is. Business 4.0, right? Absolutely in line with what the topics we're talking about. And Business 4.0, again, is bringing all of these different capabilities, cloud intelligence, automation, and agile. So we're bringing these things together, but we can't afford to go back to BAU. We have to think of what are these capabilities and where do they take us? Where do they take us in terms of breaking new ground with, and we have a lot of different problems to solve, right? And technologies today are, there are a lot of research and studies showing that we have a majority of the technologies we need today to solve our climate problem, to solve biodiversity loss. So the technologies are there. What's missing is how are we coming up with sustainable, better business models that leverage these technologies fully. So how do we go about that sustainable innovation? How do we go about that sustainable business model or even better business model? So this is a wonderful map we use, innovation map we use at TCS. It was inspired by the late Professor Clayton Christensen, who is on our board and has been a mega force behind TCS and the work that our CTO's office has been doing. How do we look at things that are radical and new, that are actually jeopardize or cannibalize our current model, but are cutting edge in the sense that they are leveraging adjacent markets or adjacent customers. And when I talk about sustainability and moving from sustainability to regenerative, we're not just looking at our customers and markets, we're looking beyond that. Who are our adjacent stakeholders? How are we impacting people through our actions? And so you're looking at supply chains, you're looking at suppliers, you're looking at stakeholders, you're looking at resource use and all of that. So basically extending that map and broadening that map, broadening that impact is sort of one of the first ways to start looking at business models, right? And then connecting the dots, connecting the impact, the environmental impact, the social good, the environmental good that you're creating, and tying that back to financial incentives as well. So that's closing the loop around creating those really robust capabilities from a business model and business model innovation point of view. This is a classic example. This image might be familiar to anyone who's lived or grown up in Mumbai, like I have. And these are the Mumbai Dabbawalas. Okay, so they basically carry lunch from homes to offices, and they are a collaborative platform, right? And we talk about platforms. I'm a big platform enthusiast. I've done a lot of work around building digital platforms and designing digital platforms. These folks are nowhere close to a high-tech platform, but they are a platform cooperative. They're made up of thousands of these lunch carriers who all own a stake in the business. They all work collaboratively, working to their strengths, and they deliver lunches from homes to offices. And they're the lifeline of Mumbai. And so the point I'm trying to make here is these types of models that regenerate, and they have a fantastic system even without technology to actually pinpoint exactly which lunchbox goes where. In fact, I think there's Six Sigma case studies on them. Their accuracy is 99.9% or greater in terms of getting the right lunchbox to the right person. So it's fast. We've also, what I want to try to say here is we also want to look behind. It's not just all about shiny new and what's out there and technology for technology's sake, but actually look back at what has worked well. How did we enable community? How did we enable robust ecosystems? How did we enable social well-being and connection? And so we want to look at those business models as well and see what can we do and what can we learn from our grandparents or our ancestors. And I think that's also a really critical thing about living in New Zealand. I think that's something that Kaupapa Maori and Mataranga Maori talks about. How are we living and what are we learning from our ancestors? And we always want to also look behind as we move ahead. Just another quick thing around, and this has been a very interesting report from Good Tech Lab that talks about when you talk about business model innovation, you've also always got choices. You've got spectrums, right? You could be looking at a root cause of something, or you could be treating a symptom. So when we are looking at impact tech or tech for good, how are we addressing that? Where do we want to be on that spectrum? And I think that also helps define your business model and actually come up with something that is innovative and fit for purpose. So, always think about that, because you can't be everything to everyone. So think about how, as a business or an impact organization, how are we placed around that, right? Whether we are looking at a low tech solution, are we looking at deep tech? Are we looking at impact first, or are we looking at being sustainable first? And these are different, really tough choices that we have to sort of make. And I think it's an important consideration as well when we look at sort of business model innovation. The second thing I wanted to focus on is digital sustainability. And when I say digital sustainability, what does it actually mean? In fact, so TCS has launched an amazing study last year with the University of Auckland around what we call the Digital Sustainability Index. And what we're trying to find out is, companies are focused on digital. Of course, COVID has accelerated that. We're 5 years ahead in terms of digital transformation than where we would have been pre-COVID. At the same time, this is also the decade of action for all of the things that I've already mentioned, right? And how are we bringing that together? How are companies looking at digital as a means to leverage and meet their sustainability goals? So the University of Auckland and TCS are working together on developing that sort of index on how are we measuring how our different businesses and organizations are performing to using and leveraging digital capability. And when I say digital capability, it's digital core, digital technologies, platforms, apps, to help meet their sustainability ESG goals. So it's quite broad. It's environmental, social, and financial. So very interesting project. And so that's sort of an understanding as well. How are we leveraging digital, and how are we being deliberate about the impacts of digital? Just to give you a sense of that, right? These are some examples of how we can use digital. Like TCS is big and leading in some of these applications that are all focused on sustainability, all focused on digital, but actually helping businesses go deep into the way they operate, into the way they interact with customers, the way they work with their employees, and everything. So you can sort of see the broad spectrum of how digital and sustainability can come together. And there's an amazing amount of resources available to us to do that. Moving even beyond that, and I kind of debated when I was preparing the slide whether to call this Web 3.0 or 4.0, depending on which scale, where you are in your journey of evolution with respect to digital transformation and things. There's a whole wave of new platforms emerging, right? We're seeing the rise of NFTs, NFTs, or blockchain, decentralized technologies, the democratization of value creation. Anyone can create value anywhere, and that value can be shared, can be transacted, can be sold, can be bought. We're seeing that sort of new wave of things, right? And then when I say next generation of platforms, we know platforms, we know things like YouTube or Airbnb, they are all platforms, but still, even though it's digital, the central authority, the owner of the platform, is still quite old school in a sense, right? It's still one authority or a centralized authority. The next generation of platforms will help you. You can be a free agent on these platforms and carry your reputation, carry your assets, your digital assets with you, right? Portable reputation. These are things that are now really we are at the cusp of these really amazing new things, which open a completely new, I think, opportunity for us, whether that's business models, whether that's how we interact, whether how we are bringing everybody into the mix, right? This is now a global challenge. Climate, sustainability, regenerative economies. It's a global challenge. Why leave anybody out? It's not for only people at the top. It's not a top-down approach. But so this democratization, I think, will lead to an amazing opportunity of actually creating impact at scale in your local, in your communities, in your localities, as an individual. right? So just to give you an example of some of these things, what I'm talking about is portable reputation, right? Now, say you're on LinkedIn, your reputation is tied to LinkedIn. What if you could grab your LinkedIn that portable reputation, take that elsewhere? Now you're collecting another reputation there. You've planted a tree. You're helping with climate change initiatives. You're reducing your own environmental footprint. How can all of that be added to your digital reputation? So if you can sort of see where I'm going with those sort of applications with Web 4.0. This is a great example of that, right? Reputational infrastructure for distributed networks. And this is a company called Sacred Capital based in Singapore. A friend of mine, Siddharth Dalekar, runs this, has founded this. It's pretty interesting. I just thought I'll pop at this as an example. And this gives you a flavor of startups working in this space. So he's developing this sort of agent-driven reputation that can be ported across these different platforms. So it's not sitting in one platform in one place. So you can take that in, and along with that, you can take action that you're creating around sustainability for the greater good. The third thing that I want to sort of focus on, I'm also conscious of time here, but is sort of hyper-local systems, right? And when we talk about circular economy or regenerative economy, we can't not talk about hyper-local because it's the here and now. It's what's that systemic view. It's that net. It's that mesh. How are we connecting to the things that we need in our locality? How are we meeting our needs here? How are we growing local? How are we consuming local? How are we making local? We know the circular economy, and circular economy actually has this is sort of the very iconic sort of butterfly diagram, which talks about on the left all of the biological flows, and on the right all of the material flows, right? Your plastics, your metals that need to be in loops, in systems. And so hyper local systems where you have a need, where I have the lemons on my tree that are excess can be used at the local food facility or food hub to make jams, and that's distributed in the community and goes back. So those sort of very, very simple examples of those hyper local systems I think can be put in effect, and the circular economy can actually come to play in fruition in a hyper local context really, really well. The 20-minute city concept in Hamilton. Okay, Professor Ian White of the University of Waikato has really taken this concept, and it's a multi-pronged concept where you have local government, you have infrastructure companies, you have the whole city basically coming together to create a 20-minute city. So everything you need, work, life, play, is available within a 20-minute walk. And so thinking about those hyper local communities and what kind of design do we need? Okay, so again, this is a tremendous opportunity for us to shape our neighborhoods into being much more productive for everybody. Just quickly on here, I see Colart on the screen. Come and probably give me a time warning, but donut economics, and Kate Rayworth has done some amazing work around this, right? Breaking planetary boundaries and where we're overshooting, where we have gaps from a planetary point of view and social point of view. Maori have a different worldview. This was the work that we have done, part of a project and initiative that I launched with a collaborator and friend, Juhi Sharif. And Juhi worked with Tena Bosadine, who is a Maori soil scientist and researcher and a thought leader around flipping that donut. So and to Leonie's point right at the start, going back to some of the roots and thinking in New Zealand, and according to Tena's vision, she felt that the donut actually was flipped, and the natural boundary, which was the foundation, should actually be the inner circle. So our natural foundation is the inner circle, and human needs is outside and is external. So it just gives you an idea of how that sort of Maori interpret this in a different way, and we need to understand and take that sort of wisdom and knowledge along with us as we design these new systems. This is also in line with some of the work that I'm doing with Juhi around this Project Moonshot, which is all about our decade of action. So Juhi and I are collaborating on what are we doing on a personal level in this decade. And one of the things that we are working on is basically just putting up a map of circular and regenerative initiatives across New Zealand. And so we're launching this, so you're getting a bit of a sneak preview. We're launching this in the coming days, and it's simply a list. And what we're trying to do is, how are we finding these projects, right? So an example of this is a project here is Deja Pet Food, that is a zero waste pet food company transforming surplus deli meats into amazing pet food. So we need to have a bit of a geography focus on hyper-local solutions, right? There are, whether that's GPS, whether that's functional maps, we need to understand what kind of infrastructure is available around me that I can tap into and close the loop on my end. So these are some of the things that we are actively working on. And with that, I will finish